The dedication and the drive. I mean, that is really why we're here.
What gets me up every morning is the love of students.
We are all about the kids. We put our lives on the line for the kids.
I knew I love you, I love you, I love every single one of you, and I have to continue doing what I'm doing to make sure that you have those opportunities to be successful.
I feel like that's what created my love for learning, is because I was really close with my teachers and my principals and all of that stuff.
I know she knows that she built me, and I'm always grateful for that.
When I grow up, I want to be a teacher so I can teach.
And when you spend time with children, you see potentials and you see the future, and you want the best for them.
Our children, our students are always, always the center. And that is what Portrait is helping us do, to keep them the center and define what that looks like.
This is much more than just words on a page. It is a new day. Now is the time to put these words into action for our students, for our community, for us.
It is hard to get that synergy going, where your partners are also hand in hand with you with the same goals, and that we have in Columbus. We're blessed to have that in Columbus.
Now we have the board that will back her up and continue to push and really get us where we need to be so we can be a model of urban education.
At a time when COVID-19 has upended school years and transformed what learning is, how it feels, and what it looks like, I need you to know your graduation is important because we need you.
Yes, this year was tough, but you have proven to us that you're tougher.
Columbus City Schools has gone on to graduate students from Harvard, from Spelman, from Morehouse, from Duke, from OSU.
These students are the future of Columbus.
When people thought that we couldn't, when people said that we wouldn't, we did.
In Columbus City Schools, Portrait of a Graduate is the cornerstone to ensuring our graduates are well equipped to thrive, not only globally, but right here in Central Ohio.
Our work is just beginning, and we look forward to taking this journey together.
Think of.
Our first attribute for our students is adaptability. Simply put, we want our students to both accept and thrive in a changing world.
One of the things is that the landscape is changing, and as the landscape changes, we have to make sure that we are preparing ourselves and our students for what is out there.
I think that adaptability is so spot on, especially for this exact situation.
We have thought about what is the future of our kids? What is the future of work? What is the future that we need to prepare them for? Well, guess what? That future just met us right now.
When the pandemic hit, our kids had to pivot immediately. They showed incredible resilience and embodied this attribute so well. Learning takes effort, and online learning requires focus and dedication.
So it made me challenge myself and, go outside of my box and be more creative in my way of learning.
I would argue that our kids have always been adapting.
They just know how to be a little bit more flexible. I mean, just because of how rapid things change.
Whether it's new leadership, a new principal, you get a new teacher, particularly when you get in middle school and high school, every year your teachers look different. You are adapting and we don't even know that we're adapting.
I don't want to be the same person I am like 2 weeks from now. I want to be better. I want to better myself every day.
I mean, you'll be working on something and the priority shifts, you're asked to work on something else. And if you don't have these adaptability skills, it's going to be hard for you to move from one to another quickly.
You can kind of change your course without negatively impacting the outcome. So you'll still get the desired outcome that you wanted, but you might just get there a different way.
And we find that that's the most compelling part of this work is how do we equip them to thrive in that rapidly changing and very complex world.
Accepting and valuing those who are different from us is at the core of global empathy.
Global empathy was something big that I learned from Columbus North International High School. It's a school where there's literally represents over 20 different countries. So many different languages are spoken at that school.
And it's very normal for me to see a kid say, hola, and then ni hao. I think that's one of the most beautiful things. We don't feel different, we feel unique. The difference is it became an asset. It's not like something we have to hide.
Columbus City Schools, I think as an organization, really allows for an unprecedented level of multicultural exposure, more than our surrounding district counterparts. We are so diverse here.
We serve lots of economic levels, so it's a multifaceted district.
And our kids see things differently. They're incredibly diverse, right? Much more acceptance of people who aren't like them, whether it be sexual orientation or race or gender identity.
If you haven't guessed by now, we see our diversity as one of our biggest strengths.
In order for us to fully realize that as a strength, we also have to be curious about one another's perspectives, life experiences, and the assets they bring to the table.
You should be there for your fellow human. And I think that it's important to teach kids that as young as we can.
I like my friends because they share. And about my friends is I don't want to make them angry or sad. I just want to cheer them up and make them happy.
Different people doesn't mean different things. Like, say a person is lighter than you. What does that mean?
You meet so many new people, different people. You get to know all these different cultures because you meet friends from countries you've never even heard from.
The world is bigger than just ourselves.
If you think of the world as all just one skin color, one religion, one culture, it's gonna be more boring because you're not gonna understand how other people feel.
The ability to be able to disagree and to be able to articulate your opinions and perspectives without being, confrontational necessarily, but also listening to one another.
Accepting and valuing those who are different from us is at the core of global empathy. It's about taking action to celebrate and protect our differences.
They are our leaders right now. They are pushing us to be better and to think better as grown-ups. And that's exactly what we need and what we're looking for.
The death of George Floyd, added an additional layer that we have kind of swept under the rug for a long time, and that's around inequity and racism.
Our students were a vital part of helping our entire community know that there were things that we just can't tolerate as citizens. And we want our students to be change agents, and they really showed us that they could be. And I think we're very proud of that as a district, to know that our students are willing and able to stand up for the things that they know are right.
This is the place where I live too. We always want to make the world a better place, so why not start now instead of waiting until it's too late?
We have to continue to march, continue to protest, continue to converse.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is President Adair, member of the Finance and Appropriation Committee. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order on Today, August 10th, we are expecting Chair Cole to join us momentarily. Because we do not have the appropriate number for quorum, we will come back up and approve the minutes. We're going to go ahead and jump right in to item number 3, which is our financial reports. So I will turn it over to the treasurer.
Thank you very much. This afternoon, I have 2 reports for you, one for June and one for July, and we'll begin with June of 2022, the last month of fiscal year 2022. For the month, revenues in June were about $5.7 million below plan, taking it to the $11.4 million above plan. For the year, expenditures for the month of June, about $67 million over plan. That's a rather shocking number, and I'll explain what that what made up that over plan variance. And expenditures then ended at $76.2 million above plan. That's a variance on revenue of about 1.4%, certainly within our acceptable range, and expenditures are 9.7 above plan. And again, I'll explain why that rather large variance. The ending cash balance, therefore, was down $63.8 million from what we anticipated, and it stood at a rounded number of $236 million at the end of the year. Getting into revenues, again, $11.4 million fiscal year to date. No property tax activity here at the end of the year. State aid was under plan this month due to some accounting adjustments that were finalized and put into place and recorded in June. You recall, this whole year we've been working under a new school funding model, and so there are some of the items in that model that, quite frankly, they weren't sure where we were going to code it. So we were recording them, happened to be recording them in I believe, a revenue item, and then when the adjustments finally came through, some of that moved out of revenue and over into expenses. So I think going forward, those kind of adjustments probably won't occur, but it's just the learning curve of this new funding formula. And so on a year-to-date basis, we're down about 4%. Going on to other revenues, I want to make sure the graph moved forward. The federal grant there, the bar that's barely visible, we're about 3 subsidies behind, 3 subsidy payments behind. We're watching that. We're waiting for the federal government to get back up to speed after COVID. I guess that's what delayed them, but we are monitoring that. And I believe we're about 3 subsidies behind at this point. No activity in property tax allocation at the end of the year, just like the real estate property tax collections. Pardon me. The second bar from the right, other revenues, they were a bit under plan in June, $1.5 million, but they did end the year above plan, about $6.4 million. Pilots and other revenues in lieu of taxes were the main contributors to the over plan item for the year. And good afternoon.
Greetings, everyone.
We'll make note that we've actually reached a quorum at 4:18.
Awesome.
That's okay. And I'll just mark the roll call as is visually, and we'll move on, and we'll come back later and do minutes if that's okay.
All right.
So that was other revenues. That's pilots, again, leading the way there. And then to note as well, we would have been further over plan, but we missed a Medicaid reimbursement payment was late in coming in. So we'll get that in the first couple of months of this new fiscal year. But we would have been even further above plan had that come in by about $4.5 million. The other financing sources jumped to slightly over plan. We received about $2.5 million in advances coming back from other funds to us in June. We'll talk a little bit more about advances, but what happens is you tend to advance monies, some monies out during the year, and then in June you clear the deck, you bring those back, and then you'll see here later where we make a rather large advance out to funds to finish out the year. So another kind of accounting entry that can look a little bit odd, but that's the way it works. So that's it on the revenue side. I want to move on to expenditures. There we go. Again, total expenditures, $75.2 million above plan year to date. Personnel for the for the month That line item was about $8.4 million under plan. This was primarily attributed to $7.5 million being recoded from general over to ESSER. So we had 3 days of Wellness Week back in November of 21, and those were eligible to be paid for or reimbursed from ESSER funds, and we did that in the month of June. So without this recoding of those expenditures, we would have been just $6 million under plan, or within 0.91% of our target, of our plan. So that would have been pretty much spot on. And remember that personnel is our, the largest, 85% of our budget. So we were, spot on there in the estimate, absent this ESSER recoding. The most significant event is in other expenditures, and I'll move to the next slide. And that'll have to do with advances, and I'll get to that in just a minute. You can see purchase services, we're a little bit further under plan this month, so they ended the year at $2.8 million under. Supplies and materials over plan, they were pretty much unchanged from May at $5.5 million above plan. Capital outlay, just slightly above plan, a little bit more in June. They ended the year at 3.5 above plan. Debt and other other objects were spot on. You see in the graph the large blue bar compared to a relatively small orange bar, and that has to do with the impact of doing these advances at year end. We did about $87 million in advances to other funds. $76 million of that was to advance funds to the ESSER fund. Now, the ESSER fund, like other state and federal funds, is reimbursed after we spend the money first, and then we get reimbursed. So we had expenditures that had been made. We're in the process of being reimbursed, but that hadn't been collected yet in the month of June. In addition, at the end of the year, not only do we have to temporarily cover a deficit cash position in these funds, we also have to cover the outstanding encumbrances. So what we're doing is covering what we call the unencumbered cash balance as well. So that was the reason behind such a large transfer. In ESSER, because it's a large fund and we're doing our best to spend those dollars, we had a large outstanding negative unencumbered balance at the end of the year. The general fund, in essence, acts as banker at the end of the year for all the other funds so that they stay solvent. The interesting thing, and you'll see this later on, you'll see that when these advances go out in June, they come back right away in the first month of July. So when I get to the 2023 report, you'll see that revenue gets returned and the cash balance returns to what it would have been at the end of the year had that large advance not been made. So with that in mind, I wanted to take a look at kind of cash balances so you can see the impact. This is a graph of the cash balances as projected in the May forecast. And the years 2018 through 21 are actual, and then 22 and 23 are the forecasted or projected years. And when we plot in the actual for 22, you can see the cash balance is down. And so that would then make a projection for 23 on the same slope of that line, still declining cash balance to 23. What we have done, though, had we not done that, we would build a cash balance a little bit in 22, but it's still come down projected on 23. So that line from 22 to 23, the slope of that line, that decline, remains the same. It's just what happened in 22, where the advance is taken out, it lowered it. Had they not been in, we would actually build a bit of a cash balance. Because ESSER is so large, we have had to, in 23, modify the plan. We'll use the May forecast, but we've modified the plan to reflect this $76 million transaction. So we're going to put it in as estimated revenue, but then we're going to take it out again as another estimated expense at the year. So we'll continue to do that until ESSER expires. And at one point in time, you're going to have money come back in, but not money go out because the fund has expired. So when that happens, you're going to see the cash balance kind of trail back up like that arrow shows you. So it comes out 1 year like it did here, 22 goes down, 23 will stay depressed, 24 will stay depressed, likely 25 will pop back up simply because of that transaction. This happens all the time with advances. Number one, most of our advances are small. We're more down in the $10 to $15 million range, not the $80 to $90 million range. And this particular transaction is short-lived. It's only going to last through fiscal 24, with the residual happening probably in fiscal 25. So I just wanted to see, have you see how that worked out. You'll see this better when we get to the November 5-year forecast, and you'll see it play out over time, and I will explain it again at that point in time. Just comparing last year to this year through I guess it's the end of the fiscal year for both years, you can see that for fiscal 22, expenditures were greater than revenues by about $47 million. Last year, we were pretty much break even. There was just a $3 million decline in cash balance. And on the right-hand side graph, you can see how the revenues and expenditures compared for each year. Although distorted for 22 expenditures in terms of this advance, you can see that both revenue and expenditures are down a couple $100 million, and that's solely due to the new funding formula and not having charters and vouchers come out on the expenditure side. So they all just shifted downward. And that's it for the fiscal year end. Again, cash balance is less than what we anticipated, but a lot of that is attributed to that large advance out that will return to the general fund literally in about 24 hours. You do it for one day, and the next week they repost it back to the general fund. So I can pause for a minute if there's any questions on June before I move to July.
Anyone? All right, we can proceed to July's report. And thank you all for bearing me just for being a little tardy with traffic the way it is.
Okay, the first report, July, and I will say this, typically I don't get the July report to you until maybe September. We got it to you this year because of, I will use Board Member Cole's terminology, adding capacity. And we added capacity in the form of the last gentleman on my left, Matthew Cordes, who has been working with me. I think he's enjoyed it, but we can't tell. Working closely with me on the monthly report methodology and numbers. He's going to chime in a bit, I believe, when we get to talk about the new state funding formula and some of the things he's discovered in it and the impact that it's going to have on the district's revenue here for a minute. But so you're getting the July report in I think, a very timely fashion, and a lot of that's attributed to him being able to do in about 24 hours what it took me 2 weeks to do before. I have to admit it was a little irritating when he came to me the next day and said, I have the spending plan done, and I think I ignored him and shut my door. So, we just moved on. So for the month and fiscal year to date, since this is the first year of the month, revenues in July were about $603,000 below plan on almost $300 million received, and expenditures were $9 million under plan on about $55 million expended. Puts us 0.2% below plan in revenues. And you'll see that there are two categories. One's really high, and one's not so much, kind of offsets that. So, but 0.2% below plan there on revenue, and expenditures 14% below plan month to date and year to date. As you can see, the cash balance now stood at 479, almost 480 million, about 8 million above plan. And that's where we recovered that what appears to be a $64 million shortfall last June. I will say that this spending plan, just to remind you, as I said earlier, it's based upon the May forecast with the adjustment for advances. So as we look at the next graph, you'll see where we put those advances in, and it looks like we were spot on, and that's because we knew what they were. So we put them in, and then we'll also take them out. You won't see them coming out in the spending plan until June. That's when we do those advances out. But during the year, and Matt pointed this out frequently to me, we didn't want it to appear that all of a sudden, relative to the May forecast, you had additional cash. So it was best to adjust those two estimates because it was so large that we wanted to make sure that that wasn't, you didn't misinterpret that. So we'll have a better picture of the cash balance. Revenue and expenditures are still compared back to that May plan. So as we go along in the next couple of months, we'll be looking at that, and it'll give you an anticipation of what November might look like when we revise the plan. Is that right, Matt? So far so good? Okay, all right. Getting to the revenue categories for July, property taxes are about $13.5 million below plan. We are in the middle of this collection period. It's second half calendar year 22. It's the first collection period for our fiscal year because we're July to June fiscal year. This will work itself out. We really know how we're doing on that collection period next month. We should get some more advances, but we should get settlement in August. So when I report out to you in August, we'll have a clearer picture of where we stand on that. State aid for the month, about $758,000 under plan for the month. And Matt did an analysis, and this is where we'll try and explain this simply because the school funding formula is, I can't even begin to tell you how many variables it has in it. I think there's probably 50 to 60 lines on the report that we get. But I'll try and reduce it, or we've been trying to reduce it, at least for my consumption here, down to simple multiplication and division. We are under plan this month, and more importantly, the estimate for the year has dropped by about $9 million due to a change in what's called our local share amount. And see if I can do this without too confusing. They make a state funding calculation, and then there's a local share, what they expect us to pay, and then a state share that the state will pay for. And they calculate local share based upon a variety of things, but three important measures in that metric are federal adjusted gross income and property valuation in the numerator. And in the denominator is the number of students, your enrollment. So it's kind of a wealth indicator. Well, for us, AGI and valuation, when they rolled into this new year, they rolled the data up and used more current data. Both of those went up. Our enrollment went down. So that means that ratio, that number that comes out, goes up. That's our local share. So if local share goes up, state share goes down. And Matt will give you some of those numbers here in a minute. And I think that's the simple way to look at it. What concerns us is when we go to November and we begin to look at trends in our district's federal AGI and in changes in valuation, and we trend those, they're typically trending up. Enrollment is typically trending down, and that indicates that our state share, our local share will go up, our state share will go down. Coupled with that, in the formula, all the lines in there, whether it's for gifted ed or special ed or English learners, there are enrollment numbers in each one of those lines. In general, if they go down and the state share goes down, it's kind of a double whammy in that multiplication, that we will experience a decline in state revenue. Now, that's the way the formula is supposed to work. For the past, I don't know how many decades that we've been capped, we should have been growing. You know, we should have gotten a higher amount, but they capped us, and that's a whole nother story. And districts whose enrollment was declining, they were on a guarantee. So it was a very inefficient model to calculate and distribute state funding. You know, now it's going to work based upon enrollment and your wealth and things like that. And so it'd be great if we were on the upside, getting more pupils, and that multiplication would work on our advantage. But now, because we appear to be a little bit wealthier, enrollment's dropping, the state funding percentage will drop for us. Coupled with that is that we don't know whether this will be continued to be phased in or not. It's on a 6-year phase-in, so kind of a third, if you will. In the forecast, we're not counting on that phase-in. So that's a conservative way to do it. And unless my legislative guy can look in his crystal ball and tell me exactly what the state might do, the conservative is to assume that it won't be factored in. So when Matt sits down and trends these numbers, we're going to be looking at a decreasing state share. And so that state funding, although we did decrease it a bit in the forecast, we're going to recalculate that a little bit more finitely or more precisely. We just did it on what projected enrollment would go down. We didn't go back and dissect this formula, so we're getting better at this, but we're picking major attributes in the formula, not all of the little pieces and parts, because I'm not so sure that we can forecast or trend them as well, but we're going to make the catch worth the chase when we look at the big pieces. So when he trends that out, it will be for a declining state amount of money. So how am I doing? Anything you want to add to all of that? Tell us, first of all, I asked him, what was the changes? We went back to when we first got the formula back in January, what was our enrollment and what was it in July? And what was our state share index back then and what it is now, just so you can see the magnitude, how all of that changed and equated to $9 million less than what we originally projected.
Yeah, our enrollment last year was 46,040.13. It's now adjusted to 44,826.56. That equated to a state share. Previously, we were getting 34.9%. Now the state share is only 29.23%.
So you can see how that 5% less in state share. So we're going to be working on that. You'll get more in the 5-year forecast, but that explains what's going on in state aid. I anticipate that since the plan is based upon the May forecast, we'll continue to see under-plan variances month by month. When we look at other revenues.
Hold on, just stand.
Yes.
Can I kind of maybe, just so I understand, because you said something like, this is how the formula is supposed to work. And so the theory behind the formula is we look at the wealth of a community, which means the community should be able to support the public education because that is how public education has been funded. And so because we're showing more wealth in our community, that means then and less enrollment, that means then that we would need to adjust then going back out to our community to gather more funds, in essence, because the formula is saying that our community has more wealth that it could give. Is that kind of, when you say the formula, that's how it's designed to work? And is that, do I kind of have that correct?
That's how the formula defines the partnership between state and local funding. It is a partnership, and what is that? Well, it varies across the state because of primarily wealth, but yeah, that changes what share they're willing to put forth on the base cost that they've determined for each student. And that base cost is really a kind of a statewide average for all these different factors. So in any given community, that base cost probably isn't sufficient, but even at that, it is saying of that base cost and the makeup of your students, and we calculate a dollar amount based upon that, how much should the community bear and how much will the state support? Yes.
And the base cost, like you just said, like for districts like ours that have sometimes specialized programs that other districts send their students to because they can't either do it because they don't have enough, like our special ed, right? So we have special ed students that come in to our district, and we know there are certain populations that cost more. So our district, in some instances, per pupil is probably more than the average, just like you said.
And they do allow for that. Okay. They have factors on all those lines. So a particular special ed category might be a factor of 1 point something more, so that on that base cost you get more for those different categories. So they do calculate that. But even at that, then that line will be multiplied by the state share.
But then do their home districts or home communities have any responsibility to help pay for that student, or no? It just all shifts to us.
Well, that conversation had to do with in-district students.
True.
The students that come to us from out of district, there's a tuition relationship.
Absolutely.
There's a tuition payment relationship going on.
Yep. So a spec ed student, just for greater clarity, a spec ed student from Pickerington that's getting services here Pickerington is ultimately responsible for that child's special ed need, but we are appropriated, the costs of educating that child.
Right, but I guess my question is then, maybe it doesn't go that deep. Like, whose community wealth or figures then are associated with that child? If Pickerington is ultimately responsible, and it could cost less or more in another district, how does that work? And maybe this is
That would require me to explain
into
to
the
you.
formula.
Right.
We would have to explain to you how the inter-district tuition rates are set. And I don't know that off the top of my head, I'm sorry, but that's where you're getting to it. This funding formula, remember, funds students where educated. That's right. And so these are our students here. Students that come to us from outside like that, there'll be this inter-district tuition arrangement. And that's handled separately, yeah.
And even still, it's nominally not a great statistical, the variation is not significant.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to understand how it works. So it's basically like that student would still be counted, like, for example, in Pickerington's numbers and funding, and then we would have an agreement between the districts about the actual whatever that looks like.
This is an excellent project for Matt. And we could take a particular, find a special ed tuition student and just take one student and analyze that relationship and look at it. What were they in their home district? What are we getting? What would they be if they were, that kind of a thing. We can delve into that at some point. But it's a great question. It's just another example of how complicated all of this is. And quite frankly, why it's important to have some, I have somebody now that can spend a significant portion of their time watching it, and these variables will change each month. And we get 2 payments each month, and he looks at the formula and those calculations. I'll walk by him and he goes, hey, such and so changed this month, up or down. And we just have to decide that this one was monumental enough that we needed to point it out to you at the committee meeting. Okay, so that's the most significant change here. Now, I will note in the second bar from the right, other revenues, again, pilots, almost $14 million above plan. And it was House Bill 126, pardon me, that was enacted, I think late in July it went into effect. And this is the piece of legislation that dramatically affected our ability to protect our property tax base by appearing and filing cases at the Board of Revision and then appealing them to the Board of Tax Appeals. And it barred or banned these direct payment agreements that we call pilots, but they're direct payment agreements where our council, in conjunction with the property tax owner, reach an agreement about valuation and reach an agreement about the payment of taxes for a certain number of years. And they make those payments directly to us. Well, there was a rush, a rather huge rush for our district, not only on our part, but on the part of those property owners to get these agreements in place because it was to everyone's benefit. And so in many of the settlements, and the board, I believe, just at the last meeting, approved a resolution confirming what we were given authorization to approve in July when you didn't meet. We were asking them to pay multiple years up front. And so we accelerated all those payments into this month in July, and you can see that was to the tune of running that line about $14 million above plan. So pilots for some existing agreements will continue, but they'll dwindle. As you recall, I pulled about $12.5 million, I think, out of 2 years of the forecast because they will expire and no longer exist. So we did our work. We got it in as many as we could and beat the deadline. The next step, you'll see a whole new, I think, process for how we go about appearing at the Board of Revision and appealing cases, things like that. So we just have to now come up with a new plan to work within the law. So that's it on the revenue side for July. When we look at expenditures, personnel ran about $9 million below plan for the month, hence the year to date. I'm sorry, total personnel was 9 million below, or I'm sorry, total expenditures were 9 million for the year and in the month. Personnel about 6.1 million under plan this month. Most of that's due to the construction of the plan. What we do in the personnel plan specifically is identify the 3 pay months and decide what percentage of the overall expense applies to the 3 pay months, and we take the residual and we just spread it equally. It goes up and down, you know, over time. We could use historical up and downs, but it's not significantly different than just flatlining it out. For personnel, you get a better picture, and this is exactly why I'm going to report to the board on a quarterly basis. It works itself out about every 3 months. You get a little bit more data under your belt, and the minute we pass the 3 pay month, we'll get a better picture. So this is not a variance to be worried about. It's more plan-driven than it is some dramatic change in behavior.
Stan, how much does ESSER even account for some of this too?
Right now, we did not change the personnel plan based upon personnel costs in ESSER because the ESSER plans are additional. They're supplemental to the, closing the gap and all that, those kinds of things. So those personnel expenditures are ones that it wasn't like we pulled them out, like the Wellness Week. We pulled that out. That would be an impact. Here, this doesn't come into play.
Gotcha.
Okay, doesn't come into play. 2 different things.
Thank you.
When we look at the non-personnel expenditures, all down about 2.9 million in total. You can see purchase services, supplies, and capital. They're all running under. The May forecast, I believe I plugged it in and based it on the budget, as I recall. So those numbers were a little bit high. So I expect these to run under plan for a while. When we get to November and we plug in the November numbers, it's likely that I'm going to then look at it from more of a cash flow standpoint and take those budgets and reduce them to get a better picture of what cash flow might be. So, but we're running under plan as I might expect. The last graph I have for you is that comparison of last year to date versus this year's to date. And it looks odd. Matt came to me and he goes, "You're going to have to explain the graph on page 8." You know, it looks very strange, but this is an easy story to tell. And what you see for fiscal 23 is 299 million in revenue and only 55 million in expenditures. But in fiscal year 22, we only got $19 million of revenue and $54 million of expenses. So the expenses look like they're in line, but what's going on with the revenues? And it's a simple explanation. In July, we usually get tax advances. We got missed. We didn't get one. And that was, we didn't see it until it was too late to call the county auditor, and the county auditor didn't see it in time to get it out in July. So we got it all in August. So it's just a timing issue. We'll see this again work itself out next month. But it sticks out like a sore thumb here. Got Matt all excited, talked him off the ledge, and but it'll work itself out. So I think all in all, 23 set up pretty good. We know how we've made some changes to the plan, what we expect, and you know, I think we'll be doing fine. Again, making comparisons to the May forecast to give you an idea of what you might see in terms of adjustments when we get to the November forecast. So unless anybody to my left has any other additions, that concludes the 2 reports for June and July.
Are there any questions from the body here? All right. Thank you for that. We can move on to our preview of fiscal year 2023 FAC meeting topics.
Do you want to go with that preview, or do you want to stop for a minute and get, trying to remember, did you guys know when Board Member Cole walked in?
Yes, sir.
You did. You noted it.
Okay, what time was that?
4:18.
4:18.
4:18. All right, so at that point in time, do you want me to call roll real quick, just for the record? Board Member Adair.
Present.
Board Member Brown is absent, but he is.
I'm here watching.
He's here watching. Chair Cole.
I am here.
Mr. Green. Here. Ms. Johnson is absent. Mr. Jordan is absent, and Mr. Miller here is present. So we do have a quorum, and if you'd like, we could do the minutes real quick and then go on with the agenda.
We certainly can. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? All right, it's been moved and seconded. If there are no folks who are saying no, we'll move along with that accepted.
Okay, thank you very much. Those minutes are accepted. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, I believe I will turn over to somebody on my left. I'll let them fight over who's going to take that one. Who's going to speak first?
Thank you very much. We have before you the preview of the fiscal year 2023 FAC meeting topics. As you can see before you, in September, we're anticipating ESSER update. In October, the 5-year forecast, including implications on future funding, with November being an enterprise funds update. In December, it's going to be a dealer's choice of either the ESSER update or an update on the FMP execution. January, we'll have an operating levy discussion based upon the November 2022 5-year forecast. February, we'll see another ESSER update. March, we'll see our fiscal year 2024 budget presentations before the committee, with April bringing again the May 5-year forecast update. Enterprise funds with another update in May, and then ending it in June with a final ESSER update. So we're kind of bringing ESSER and quarterly enterprise funds about twice a year, other topics, general discussion.
All right, are there any questions?
Just most notable, with our new Director of Finance, Mr. Addison, he's got some great new plans for how you're going to hear the next budget presentation. It'll be more combined. I don't know, do you have anything you want to explain about that briefly?
Briefly.
Ben has to go. President has to go.
Sure, we're combining 2 meetings into one to be more efficient and to provide better information. That's it.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All right. If there are no other questions or comments, I just want to close by saying thank you again.
Well, you have one more item.
Sorry, one more thing.
item.
Forgive me. Go right ahead.
I think, Terry?
Sure, I'll take it real fast. We would like to present before the committee here a general fund appropriation increase for dues and fees associated with a voucher litigation joinder that was approved by the board 2 years ago, so we're in the 2nd year of this. We're asking, or will be asking the board at the next board meeting to increase the appropriations for the general fund to the tune of $91,000, and that's it.
All right. This is nothing we have to vote on.
No, it's not. It's just informational, and this is this budget. This is just a budgetary oversight.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that wraps it up?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, moved and seconded. No nays. All in favor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful, safe trip home, everybody. Please. Traffic is a little funky today.